6 months after a chance meeting at a charity gala, Vivian Ola discovered that the mysterious billionaire who captivated her is now threatening to destroy her beloved community center. Brian Hopper's development project would displace her entire neighborhood, but he's offered something unexpected, a chance to be heard. As they prepare for a public showdown, both are grappling with an attraction neither can afford and a connection that refuses to die. Now, with 1 week until the community meeting, Vivian must choose between her principles and a man who makes her feel alive again. Sometimes the most dangerous storms are the ones that break inside your heart. The War Room, as Mama Adeyemi insisted on calling it, was actually the Umoja Collective's main gallery, but with the paintings covered and folding tables arranged in rows, it felt appropriately militant. 47 community members had shown up for the emergency meeting, more than Vivian had dared hope for. Mrs. Johnson from the Soul Food restaurant sat beside Marcus from the barbershop. The church deacons occupied the front row. Teenagers from Vivian's art program sprawled in the back, their anger at the threatened displacement evident in their body language. Vivian stood before them, the development folder open on the table beside her, and felt the weight of their trust pressing down on her shoulders. "They're calling it the Bronzeville Renaissance Project," she began, her voice steady despite the storm in her chest. "They're promising affordable housing, job training, community investment. It sounds good on paper. But," Marcus prompted, his arms crossed, "but 30% affordable housing means 70% luxury condos. Job training doesn't help if the new jobs require degrees most of us don't have. And community investment," she gestured to the glossy renderings, "looks nothing like our actual community." Mrs. Johnson raised her hand, a gesture so polite it made Vivian's heart ache. The woman had fed half the neighborhood through hard times, never asking for payment she knew wouldn't come, and now she was asking permission to speak in defense of her own home. "Go ahead, Mrs. J. My restaurant been on that corner 32 years. Same corner my mama had a hair salon before me. Same corner my grandmother sold flowers during the Depression. They offering me relocation assistance, you know what that means? Money to move somewhere cheaper, somewhere without history, somewhere that ain't home. That ain't assistance. That's erasure." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Vivian watched faces harden with determination. These were people who'd survived worse than gentrification, who'd survived redlining and white flight and economic abandonment. But survival shouldn't be the only bar they had to clear. "The community meeting is in 6 days," Vivian continued. "City council will be there, the developers, media. It's our chance to make them understand what they're destroying. But we need to be strategic. Emotional appeals matter, but so do facts, alternatives, solutions." "What kind of solutions?" one of the teenagers called out, Jamal, a gifted muralist who'd painted the center's exterior walls with images of black excellence. "They don't care about solutions that don't make them rich." "Maybe. But we have to try." Vivian pulled up the research she'd been compiling for 3 sleepless nights. Other cities have implemented community land trusts, where residents collectively own the property and control development. There's participatory budgeting, where the community decides how investment money gets spent. There are models that work, that preserve neighborhoods while still allowing growth. We just have to convince them ours is worth saving. And if we can't? Mama Adeyemi's question was gentle but necessary. Vivian met her mentor's eyes. "Then we fight anyway. We make so much noise they can't ignore us. We make them see our faces, hear our stories, recognize our humanity. Even if we lose, we make them remember what they took." The room fell silent. Then Marcus stood, his massive frame commanding attention. "I'm in. Whatever you need." "Me too," Mrs. Johnson added. One by one they stood, a community rising to defend itself. Vivian felt tears threaten but blinked them back. Crying was for after. Right now, she needed to be their general. "All right," she said, voice rough with emotion. "Let's get to work." Brian's office had become a prison of guilt. The development plans spread across his desk mocked him with their clean lines and projected profits. On paper, the Bronzeville Renaissance project was a masterpiece, urban renewal done right, or as right as capitalism allowed. But Vivian's words haunted him. "You're erasing a community's heart for profit. You look like hell," Marcus observed, walking in without knocking, a privilege of friendship that dated back to their college days when they'd both been hungry and ambitious, before Brian had achieved success and Marcus had settled for being his right hand. "Thanks for the input. Seriously, man. You've been staring at those plans for 2 hours. What's the problem?" "The problem," Brian stood, needing movement, "is that she's right. About all of it. I'm doing exactly what she accused me of, and I don't know how to do it differently." Marcus settled into the chair across from Brian's desk, his expression thoughtful. "The artist from the gala. She really got to you." It wasn't a question. Marcus had known Brian too long to miss the signs, the distraction, the unusual hesitation, the way Brian kept returning to this one project when he had a dozen others demanding attention. "She's brilliant," Brian said quietly. "And she's engaged. And she's about to lose everything she's built because of me. The ring, right? Though I still don't think. It doesn't matter what you think. She's unavailable, and even if she wasn't, I'm the villain in her story. There's no universe where this ends well. So why not just walk away? Sell the project to another developer. You've got plenty of other deals." Brian had asked himself the same question 100 times. The honest answer was complicated, part stubbornness, part genuine belief in the project's potential, part desperate desire to prove to Vivian that he could be better than her worst assumptions about him. And part, the part he barely admitted to himself, was simply wanting a reason to see her again. "Because if I walk away, the next developer will be worse. They'll raise everything without a second thought. At least I'm trying to do some good." "The road to hell," Marcus quoted. "She said the same thing?" Marcus studied him for a long moment. "You know what I think? I think you've been running your life like a business for so long, you forgot how to run it like a life. You build empires but no connections. You accumulate success but no meaning. And then you met someone who reminded you what you're missing, and now you're terrified." The observation landed like a punch. Brian returned to the window, his usual refuge, and watched the city that had made him wealthy but never happy. 42 floors below, people lived actual lives, messy, complicated, full of connections he traded for square footage and stock options. "I donated $1 million to her center," he admitted. "The night of the gala. Anonymous donation. Jesus, Brian. Why? Because I couldn't have her, so I wanted to at least help her dream. Pathetic, right? Kind of romantic, actually. In a stalker billionaire sort of way. She doesn't know it was me. And with this development, it probably looks like I was just salving my conscience in advance." Marcus stood, clapping a hand on Brian's shoulder. "Then tell her. Tell her you've been trying, in your own broken way, to do right by her. Maybe it won't change anything, but at least you'll know you were honest. And if honest still makes me the villain? Then at least you're a villain with integrity. That's something." After Marcus left, Brian pulled up the Umoja Collective's website. Vivian had updated it recently, new photos of the renovated space, testimonials from community members, a calendar of upcoming events. There was a picture of her teaching a painting class, surrounded by children, her face lit with pure joy. He'd done that in a way. His anonymous donation had funded the renovations, the expanded programming, the hope that now he was threatening to destroy. God, what a mess. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother, one of her rare communications, usually preceded by months of silence. *I saw you're redeveloping Bronzeville. Your father would be proud. He always said that neighborhood had potential. Brian stared at the message, feeling ill. His father had been a ruthless developer who died wealthy and alone, having spent his life accumulating property and alienating everyone who'd ever loved him. The idea that Brian was making him proud felt like an indictment, not a compliment. He typed and deleted 3 responses before settling on, "Thanks, Mom." Then he returned to the window and watched the city swallow the afternoon sun, wondering when he'd become the man he'd sworn he'd never be. The meeting was scheduled for Saturday at 2 p.m. in the Bronzeville Community Center's main hall. By noon, every seat was filled, with overflow crowds gathering outside. Local news crews set up cameras. City council members arranged themselves at the head table with expressions ranging from bored to defensive. And Brian sat in the front row beside his legal team, watching Vivian orchestrate controlled chaos with the poise of a woman who'd been preparing for this moment her entire life. She wore a traditional Nigerian outfit, a brilliant orange geli head wrap and matching iro and buba that made her look like royalty. Every choice was deliberate, Brian realized. She wasn't just a community organizer today, she was a symbol, a bridge between heritage and present, a living argument for why culture mattered more than profit. Their eyes met briefly across the room. Something passed between them, acknowledgement, maybe, or recognition that they were about to go to war. Then Vivian looked away, and Brian felt the loss like a physical thing. The meeting opened with predictable formality. The city council representative, Alderman Davis, droned through procedural language about community input and responsible development. The Hopper development attorney presented the project's benefits with PowerPoint efficiency. It was all very corporate, very sanitized, very designed to make displacement sound like opportunity. Then Vivian stepped to the microphone, and the room transformed. "My name is Vivian Ola," she began, her voice clear and strong. "And I want to tell you a story about what community actually means." She didn't use notes. Didn't rely on data or projections. Instead, she painted a picture with words the way she did with brushstrokes, vivid, emotional, impossible to ignore. She told them about Mr. Peterson, who'd sold his building not because he wanted to but because he was 86 and broke, ground down by property taxes that had tripled as speculators circled. About Mrs. Johnson, whose sole food restaurant was the neighborhood's living room, feeding bodies and souls alike. About the teenagers who found purpose in art when schools had given up on them. About Mama Adeyemi, who'd survived the civil rights movement and redlining and white flight, only to face a new form of erasure disguised as progress. The Bronzeville Renaissance Project promises investment, Vivian continued, her passion building. But we don't need investment in luxury condos that we can't afford. We need investment in us, in our schools, our small businesses, our crumbling infrastructure. We need partners, not saviors. We need respect, not relocation assistance. The room erupted in applause. Brian watched Alderman Davis shift uncomfortably, watched his own attorney take nervous notes, watched the media representatives lean forward with the hunger of people who just found their headline. Then Vivian did something unexpected. She looked directly at Brian. "Mr. Hopper came to a gala 6 months ago. He looked at my art, listened to my dreams about the Umoja Collective, and told me I was worth investing in. Someone, maybe him, maybe not, donated $1 million that saved my center. That person understood that culture has value, that community matters, that some things can't be measured in quarterly returns." Brian's heart hammered against his ribs. She knew. Somehow she knew. "So I want to ask Mr. Hopper directly, is that person still in there? The one who understood? Or has he been buried under profit margins and development deals?" The room fell silent. Every eye turned to Brian, waiting. His attorney started to stand, to object, to deflect, but Brian waved him off. He rose and faced Vivian across the charged space between them, aware that whatever he said next would define not just this project but who he was as a man. "Yes," he said simply. "That was me. The donation." Gasps rippled through the audience. Vivian's expression flickered, surprise, confusion, something that might have been hope. "Why?" she asked. "Because that night you reminded me why I got into this business in the first place. Before it became about money and empire building, I wanted to create spaces where life happened, where communities thrived. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that. You made me remember. Then why are you destroying us?" The question hung in the air, accusatory and pleading at once. Brian felt the weight of 40 years of choices pressing down on him, every corner cut, every compromise made, every time he'd chosen profit over people because it was easier, because it was expected, because he'd learned that caring too much meant losing. "Because I'm a coward," he admitted, and the honesty felt like stripping naked in front of strangers. "Because I convinced myself that doing some good was enough, even when it came packaged with tremendous harm. Because I've been building empires instead of communities, and I didn't know how to do it differently." "Learn," Vivian said, her voice gentler now. "We're offering to teach you. Work with us, not against us. Build something that serves the people already here, not just the ones you hope will come. Be the man who donated $1 million, not the one taking away our homes." Brian looked around the room, at faces hardened by broken promises, at the community that had every reason to distrust him, at the city council members calculating political advantages, at his attorney urgently whispering about liability and optics. Then he looked at Vivian, and he made a choice. "Okay." The single word landed like an explosion. His attorney grabbed his arm. "Brian, you can't just." "I can and I am." He turned to Alderman Davis. "I'm withdrawing the current development proposal. Whatever happens in Bronzeville will be designed with the community, not imposed on them. We'll establish a community land trust, implement participatory budgeting, ensure that any new development serves existing residents first." "That's not legally binding," the attorney hissed. "Then draw up papers that make it legally binding. That's what I pay you for." The room erupted, cheers, arguments, confused questions. Brian ignored all of it, his eyes locked on Vivian. She looked stunned, her careful composure finally cracking to reveal something raw underneath. "Why?" she asked again, this time barely audible above the chaos. "Because you were right. About all of it. And because—" he paused, aware he was about to cross a line he couldn't uncross. "Because I'm tired of building a life where the only thing that matters is what I've accomplished instead of who I've become." Before Vivian could respond, Mama Adeyemi appeared at her side, pulling her into a fierce embrace. Mrs. Johnson was crying. The teenagers were celebrating. The community was having its moment, and Brian was an outsider to their joy, the villain who'd maybe, possibly, become something else. He left before the meeting officially ended, needing air, needing space to process what he'd just done. His attorney followed him to the parking lot, furious and frightened. "Do you have any idea what you just committed to? The board will crucify you. Your investors will walk. This could tank the entire company." "Let it tank," Brian said, and meant it. "I've spent 20 years building an empire that makes me miserable. Maybe it's time to build something that actually matters." He drove back to his penthouse in silence, his phone already exploding with texts and calls from board members and investors demanding explanations. He ignored them all. Let them panic. Let them threaten. Let them learn that he was finally, catastrophically, choosing something besides profit. That night, alone with his whiskey and his city view, Brian pulled out his phone and typed a message to Vivian. He wrote and deleted it 5 times before settling on simplicity. "I meant what I said today. All of it. We'll do this right, or we won't do it at all. Brian." He hit send before he could overthink it, then waited in the darkness for a response that might not come. 3 hours later, his phone buzzed. "I need to understand why. Really why. Not the press conference answer. The truth. Can we talk? Vivian." Brian's heart did something complicated in his chest. He typed back immediately. "Name the time and place." Her response came within seconds. "The Collective. Tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Come alone." The Umoja Collective looked different at night, softer, more intimate, with track lighting illuminating the murals that told stories of struggle and triumph. Brian arrived at exactly 8, his usual armor of suits replaced with jeans and a Henley, an attempt at being just a man instead of a billionaire developer. Vivian was waiting in the main gallery, standing before a massive canvas he hadn't seen before. She changed out of the traditional outfit into paint-stained overalls and a tank top, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked younger like this, more vulnerable, more real. That's new, he said, gesturing to the painting. She didn't turn around. I started it the night after I got your eviction notice. It's called Storm Breaking. Brian studied the canvas. It showed the same woman from Waiting for Thunder. But now the storm had arrived, lightning splitting the sky, rain pouring down, sunflowers bent by wind. But the woman's arms were raised in welcome, not defense, and somehow the destruction looked like cleansing. It's extraordinary, he said quietly. It's about surrendering to the things you can't control. She finally turned to face him. About letting go of the past and accepting that sometimes destruction is necessary for rebirth. Is that what today was? Destruction or rebirth? I don't know yet. She moved to a paint-splattered table where 2 glasses of wine waited. I needed to see you outside of that performance. Away from cameras and speeches and public personas. I needed to know if what you said was real or just good politics. Brian accepted the wine, their fingers brushing in the exchange. That electric shock from the gala, it was still there, undiminished by time or conflict. It was real. Probably the most real thing I've said in years. Then help me understand. Vivian leaned against the table, studying him with those penetrating eyes. You're Brian Hopper, billionaire, empire builder, man who turns everything he touches into gold. Why throw that away for a community you don't know, led by a woman who's done nothing but challenge you? Because I'm 42 years old, and I can't remember the last time I did something that made me feel alive instead of just successful. He set down the wine, needing his hands free to gesture, to explain. I've been building my father's dream, bigger, richer, more powerful, without stopping to ask if it was mine. And then I met you. Brian. Let me finish. Please. He took a breath. That night at the gala, you talked about making space for stories that matter. About teaching people their pain and joy deserve to be seen. And I realized I've spent my entire adult life making sure my story never gets told, that nobody sees past the success to the emptiness underneath. Vivian's expression softened. What made you so empty? The question was gentle, but it cut deep. Brian found himself moving toward her painting, using it as a focal point while he excavated truths he usually kept buried. My father was like me, brilliant at business, terrible at being human. He built a real estate empire and destroyed his family in the process. My mother stayed for the money and drank to forget why. My sister, his voice caught. She tried to escape, got addicted to painkillers, died of an overdose when she was 29. And through it all, my father kept building, kept acquiring, kept telling himself the empire mattered more than the casualties. I'm so sorry. I swore I'd be different. Better. But every deal I close, every property I flip, I see him in the mirror. I've become what I hated, and I don't know how to stop because this is all I know how to be. Silence filled the gallery. Then Vivian moved beside him, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something floral and warm that made him think of summer gardens and second chances. That ring I wear, she said quietly. The one you noticed at the gala. It belonged to my fiancé, David. He died 2 years ago in a car accident. Drunk driver, wrong place, wrong time. We were supposed to get married that summer. Brian's chest tightened. Vivian, I kept the ring because I convinced myself I was honoring his memory. But really, I was hiding behind it. Using it as a shield against ever feeling that vulnerable again, that open to being destroyed by loss. Grief became my identity, and I didn't know how to be anything else. She turned to face him fully, and Brian saw tears shimmering in her eyes. That night at the gala, when you talked to me about my art, when you actually saw it instead of just looking, I felt something I hadn't felt since David died. I felt like maybe I could be more than my pain. And it terrified me. So you noticed it too. What happened between us? Of course I noticed. You looked at me like I was the only person in that room. Like I mattered. She laughed softly, wiping at her eyes. And then you disappeared, and I convinced myself I'd imagined it. That I'd been so starved for connection I'd invented chemistry that wasn't there. It was there, Brian said firmly. It's still there. I donated that money because I couldn't have you, but I could at least help your dream survive. And when this development came across my desk and I saw your center's address, I told myself I could do it responsibly, that I could separate business from feeling. But I've thought about you every single day for 6 months. Brian, I'm not asking for anything, he continued, needing to get it all out. I know the timing is terrible. I know I'm the last person you should trust. I know you're still grieving, and I'm still figuring out how to be a decent human being. But I need you to know, today wasn't about winning you over. It was about choosing, for once in my pathetic life, to be someone worth knowing. Someone David would have approved of. The last sentence seemed to break something in Vivian. She closed the distance between them, and before Brian could process what was happening, she was kissing him. It was desperate and sweet and tasted like wine and tears and truth. Brian's hands found her waist, pulling her closer, and Vivian melted into him like she'd been waiting for this, for him, for permission to finally let go of the past. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Vivian pressed her forehead to his. I took off the ring, she whispered. 3 days ago. After the meeting. I realized I'd been using David's memory as an excuse to not live, to not risk loving someone new. He would have hated that. Brian pulled back enough to see her hand, bare now, the tan line still visible where the ring had been. Something fierce and protective surged through him. Are you sure? Because I can wait. I will wait, Vivian. However long you need. I don't want to wait anymore. I've spent 2 years waiting for thunder that already broke. It's time to learn how to dance in the rain. They kissed again, slower this time, learning each other's rhythms. Brian felt something unknot in his chest, some ancient tension he'd carried so long he'd forgotten it wasn't permanent. Here, in this gallery filled with stories that mattered, with this woman who saw through every defense he'd ever built, he felt the possibility of becoming someone different. Someone better. So what now? Vivian asked, still in his arms. You've committed to completely redesigning your development. Your board probably wants your head. The media is going to have a field day with this story, the billionaire and the activist, the corporate villain redeemed by love. It's a lot. It's terrifying, Brian agreed. I have no idea how to do community-centered development. I'll probably fail spectacularly. Good thing you have me, then. She grinned. I'll teach you. We'll figure it out together, the art of building something that actually serves people instead of displacing them. And us? Is there an us? Vivian's expression turned serious. I don't know. We're both broken in our own ways, both trying to figure out who we are without the armor we've been wearing. It's going to be messy and complicated and probably painful sometimes. Sounds perfect. She laughed, the sound pure and joyful. You're ridiculous. I'm serious. Messy and complicated sounds infinitely better than empty and controlled. Then yes. There's an us. Or at least there could be, if we're brave enough to try. Brian kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips, gentle confirmations that this was real, that she was choosing him despite every reasonable objection. I've made a career of calculated risks. This might be the first uncalculated one. Well then. Vivian took his hand, lacing their fingers together. Let's see what happens when Brian Hopper stops calculating and starts living. 6 months later, the groundbreaking ceremony for the new Bronzeville Community Trust development looked nothing like Brian's original vision. There were no luxury high-rises, no high-end retail, no glossy renderings of a neighborhood scrubbed of its identity. Instead, the plans showed affordable townhomes designed by local architects, commercial spaces reserved for existing businesses, community centers and parks created through input from residents themselves. It would make less money. Significantly less. Half his board had resigned, and several investors had pulled out, calling Brian soft and impractical. But standing beside Vivian as Mrs. Johnson blessed the ground and Mama Adeyemi led a prayer in Yoruba, Brian felt something he'd never experienced at any of his other developments. pride. "You did it," Vivian whispered, squeezing his hand. "We did it," he corrected. "I'm just the guy with the money. You're the one who knew how to use it right." The past 6 months had been the most challenging of Brian's life. Learning to listen instead of dictate, to partner instead of lead, to care about outcomes beyond profit margins, all of it required unlearning 40 years of conditioning. There had been fights and setbacks and moments when he'd wanted to revert to his old ways because they were easier, cleaner, more familiar. But Vivian had been there through all of it, challenging him, teaching him, believing in the person he could become even when he doubted himself. They'd navigated the complications of being together while working together, of building both a relationship and a community project, of learning to trust while being terrified of being hurt. It wasn't always pretty. They argued about money and power, and whose voice mattered most in decision-making. They struggled with the media attention, think pieces about gentrification and redemption, gossip columns speculating about their relationship, activists questioning whether Vivian had sold out by loving the enemy. But through it all, they kept choosing each other. Kept showing up, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. "There's something I need to tell you," Brian said as the ceremony wound down, pulling Vivian aside to a quiet corner of what would soon be a community garden. She looked up at him with those eyes that still made his heart stutter, and he felt the weight of what he was about to say pressing against his ribs. "I love you." Simple words, but they cost everything: pride, control, the carefully maintained distance he'd used to protect himself from being hurt. Saying them meant admitting she had the power to destroy him, that he'd given her weapons he'd never given anyone. Vivian's eyes filled with tears. "I love you too. Even though you're still figuring out how to not be an asshole sometimes, even though this is messy and complicated and possibly doomed, I love you." "Possibly doomed?" Brian raised an eyebrow. "That's romantic. I'm a realist. We're a billionaire and an artist, a developer and a community organizer. We come from different worlds, want different things, have different definitions of success. The odds aren't great. Good thing I've always been a gambler." He pulled a small box from his pocket, and Vivian's breath caught. But when he opened it, instead of a ring, there was a key. "This isn't a proposal," Brian said quickly. "It's an investment. This key opens the building next to the Umoja Collective. I bought it last month. I'm donating it to your foundation to expand programming. More art classes, more community space, more room to tell stories that matter." Vivian stared at the key, then at him, tears streaming freely now. "Brian, I learned from the best teacher that real partnership means empowering the people who know what they're doing, not trying to control everything. So this is yours, no strings attached. Build something beautiful." She launched herself at him, kissing him like the world was ending and beginning at the same time. Around them, the ceremony continued, speeches about hope and renaissance and second chances. But in their small corner, Brian and Vivian were writing their own story, one where broken people learned to build something whole. "For the record," Vivian said when they finally broke apart, "when you do actually propose, and you better Hopper, I expect a much bigger gesture than a building key." "Noted. I'm thinking skywriting over Grant Park." "Now you're talking my language." They rejoined the ceremony, hands clasped, and Brian felt the Chicago sun warm on his face. His phone buzzed with angry messages from his remaining board members, worried texts from his accountant about quarterly losses, interview requests from journalists wanting to document his transformation from corporate villain to community hero. He ignored them all. Right now, in this moment, he was exactly where he needed to be, building something that mattered with a woman who taught him that success wasn't measured in dollars but in lives changed, communities served, connections made. 18 months later. The Ola Hopper Foundation's grand opening fell on a perfect October evening, when Chicago's autumn chill hadn't yet turned brutal, and the city glowed with golden hour light. The converted warehouse in Bronzeville, the building Brian had gifted Vivian, now housed 3 floors of studios, galleries, and community spaces, all designed by local artists and architects. Every wall told stories through murals and installations. Every room hummed with creative possibility. Vivian stood at the center of the main gallery, surrounded by her newest collection. The second time around. 15 paintings, each depicting a moment of transformation, a phoenix rising from ashes, storm clouds giving way to rainbows, a woman removing a ring and opening her hand to new possibilities. The centerpiece, hanging above the entrance, showed two figures building a bridge together over troubled waters, their hands intertwined as they worked. Brian found her there, as he always did when she was nervous, and pulled her close from behind. "Congratulations, Ms. Ola. You did it." "We did it, Mr. Hopper. How many times do I have to remind you?" "At least once a day for the rest of our lives." He turned her to face him, and Vivian saw something bright in his eyes, anticipation maybe, or nerves. "Speaking of which..." He dropped to one knee, and the gallery fell silent. Vivian's heart stopped. "Vivian Ola, you are the storm that broke my carefully controlled life apart, and I have never been more grateful for destruction. You taught me that building empires means nothing if you're not building connections, that success without purpose is just accumulation, that the best things we create are the ones we create together. I love you more than I thought I could love anything. Will you marry me?" The ring he presented was stunning, a conflict-free diamond surrounded by sapphires the color of storm clouds, set in a band etched with Adinkra symbols representing love, strength, and perseverance. "You researched Ghanaian symbolism," Vivian whispered, tears already falling. "I had help from Mama Adeyemi. She's been planning this with me for 3 months. Said if I was going to be part of the family, I needed to understand where you come from." Vivian looked around the gallery, at the community they'd built together, at the faces watching with joy and anticipation, at the art on the walls that told their story of second chances and hard-won redemptions. She looked at Brian, this man who'd started as the enemy and become her partner, who'd learned to surrender control and embrace vulnerability, who'd chosen love over profit even when it cost him everything. "Yes," she said. 1,000 times yes." The room erupted in cheers as Brian slipped the ring onto her finger. It sat differently than David's ring had, not a ghost of the past, but a promise for the future. Vivian kissed her fiancé and felt the final pieces of her grief transform into gratitude, for what she'd had, for what she'd lost, and for what she'd found on the other side of sorrow. Later that night, after the speeches and celebrations died down, they stood on the building's rooftop and watched Chicago spread out before them, a city of constant reinvention, of neighborhoods rising and falling and rising again, of stories layered like sediment in stone. "What are you thinking?" Brian asked, arms wrapped around her from behind. "That we met too early to fall in love, and just in time to find it again. That sounds like a good title for something." "It was my original name for the painting series, before I changed it to the second time around." She leaned back against his chest. "But I like this one better. It's about circular time instead of linear. The idea that we keep getting chances, keep learning, keep growing, keep coming back to what matters. I like that. Especially coming from someone who used to think one chance was all you got." Vivian turned in his arms, studying the face she'd come to know so well, the lines around his eyes that deepened when he laughed, the way his jaw tightened when he was working through a problem, the vulnerability that now lived openly in his expression instead of hidden behind corporate polish. "You changed me," she said softly. "Made me believe that loving again wasn't betraying what I'd lost. That opening my heart didn't mean forgetting David, just making room for something new alongside the memory. You changed me too. Made me believe I could be more than my father's legacy, that I didn't have to choose between success and humanity." He kissed her forehead. "Though I'm still figuring out this whole not being an asshole thing. You're doing better. Last week you only tried to solve 3 problems by throwing money at them instead of listening first. Progress." He grinned. "My therapist is very proud. I'm proud too." Vivian meant it. Watching Brian unlearn 40 years of conditioning, seeing him struggle and fail and try again, had been one of the most beautiful things she'd witnessed. He would never be perfect, either of them would, but he was committed to growth, to being better, to choosing love even when his old instincts screamed for control. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mama Adeyemi. The ancestors are smiling tonight, baby girl. You chose well. Mama approves. Vivian showed Brian the message. Thank God. I was genuinely terrified of asking her permission. You should have been. She would have ended you if she thought you weren't serious. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city lights twinkle like earthbound stars. Somewhere below, the neighborhood they'd fought to preserve continued its evening rhythms. Mrs. Johnson closing up her restaurant, Marcus locking the barbershop, teenagers creating art on the collective's walls, families gathering in the community gardens they'd helped design. I've been thinking about next steps, Brian said carefully. For the foundation, for us. Tell me, what if we replicated this model? Not just in Chicago, but in other cities facing gentrification. We create a network of community land trusts, teach developers how to work with neighborhoods instead of against them, build a movement around development that actually serves people. He paused. I know it's ambitious. It's perfect. Vivian's mind was already racing with possibilities. We could create a fellowship program, train community organizers and developers together, break down the us versus them mentality. Document what works and what doesn't. Build a blueprint for ethical development. You'd be willing to expand beyond Chicago? It would mean a lot of travel, a lot of time away from the collective. The collective has incredible staff now. And I think this story, our story, needs to be told in more places. She squeezed his hand. Besides, I don't want to just create art anymore. I want to help create systems that let other artists thrive. Brian pulled her closer, his expression full of that wonder she never got tired of seeing. How did I get so lucky? You made a choice. 6 months ago, in that community meeting, you chose vulnerability over control. Everything since then has just been following that thread. Best choice I ever made. Well, second best. He tapped the ring on her finger. This one might edge it out. Smooth, Hopper. Very smooth. They kissed under the Chicago stars, and Vivian felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. This wasn't the fairy tale she'd imagined with David, that had been young love, full of certainty and plans and the arrogance of thinking the future was guaranteed. This was something different, mature love, built on loss and healing and the courage to try again knowing how badly things could break. It was better, she realized. Not because it erased what came before, but because it honored it. David had taught her what love could be. Brian was teaching her what it could become after devastation, how it could grow deeper, wiser, more resilient for having survived the worst. I want to paint something new, Vivian said suddenly. A piece for our wedding. Something about bridges and building and two people creating a life together from broken pieces. I love that. Though I have one request. What's that? No matter how metaphorical you get with the symbolism, please make sure I look good. I have a reputation to maintain. Vivian laughed, the sound echoing across the rooftop. Your reputation as what? Reformed villain? Billionaire with a conscience? The man who chose love over profit? How about just Vivian Ola's fiancé? That's the only title I care about anymore. God, you've gotten sappy. Your fault entirely. He kissed her again, then checked his watch. Come on. We should get back downstairs before Mama Adeyemi sends a search party. You know how she gets. They made their way back down to the gallery, where the celebration continued. The community had turned out in force, not just for the foundation opening, but to celebrate one of their own finding happiness after heartbreak. Vivian moved through the crowd, accepting hugs and congratulations, introducing Brian to elders who'd known her since childhood, watching him navigate these spaces with increasing comfort and genuine interest. Mrs. Johnson pulled her aside near the catering table. That man of yours, he's good people. I wasn't sure at first, all that money, that power, but he listens. Really listens. That's rare. It is, Vivian agreed, watching Brian crouch down to talk to one of her young art students about the child's drawing. Your David, God rest him, he would approve. He always wanted you to be happy, to keep creating, to keep fighting for what mattered. You're doing all of that. Vivian felt tears threaten again. You think so? I know so. Love isn't about replacing people, baby. It's about making room for new chapters while honoring the old ones. You've done that beautifully. The validation settled something in Vivian's chest, the last whisper of guilt she'd been carrying, the fear that moving forward meant leaving David behind. Mrs. Johnson's words gave her permission to fully embrace this new life without shame, without reservation. As the evening wound down and guests began to filter out, Vivian found herself back at the centerpiece painting, the two figures building their bridge. She'd painted it during one of their arguments, when she'd been frustrated with Brian's instinct to fix everything instead of sitting with discomfort, when he'd been annoyed by her insistence on process over efficiency. The painting had helped her see that their differences weren't obstacles but complementary strengths, his drive and her patience, his resources and her vision, his privilege and her lived experience all combining to create something neither could build alone. Brian appeared beside her, following her gaze. You know what I see when I look at that? What? Hope. Not the naive kind that ignores how hard things are, but the earned kind that comes from surviving the worst and choosing to try anyway. He wrapped an arm around her waist. That's what you've given me. That's what we've built together. And we're just getting started, Vivian said. Wait until we have to plan this wedding. Then you'll really see what bridges under construction look like. Bring it on. I've negotiated multi-million-dollar deals. How hard can wedding planning be? Vivian burst out laughing. Oh, honey. You have no idea what you've just walked into. But I'm walking into it with you. That's all that matters. They stood together in the gallery they'd created, surrounded by art that told stories of transformation and second chances. And Vivian felt the pieces of her life click into place, not the life she'd planned, but the one she'd built from the rubble of loss and disappointment. It was scarred and imperfect, and absolutely beautiful. Outside, Chicago continued its eternal cycle of death and rebirth, destruction and creation, ending and beginning. And inside the Ola Hopper Foundation, two people who'd met too early to fall in love had found each other again at exactly the right moment, proving that sometimes the best stories are the ones we get to write the second time around. If you loved Brian and Vivian's journey from enemies to soulmates, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me your favorite moment from their story. Should I create more contemporary romances like this? Let me know. And remember, whether it's in love, career, or life, sometimes we all deserve a second time around. Until the next story, keep believing in second chances and the courage to choose love even when it's complicated. Peace.